Welcome back to the TrailBLAZER Pod. I'm your host, Faye, and each week I bring you stories of Jewish women who are trailblazers. This week's trailblazer is Rabbi Joanna Samuels. She's the CEO of the JCC of Manhattan and embodies what it means to lead with both strength and compassion. In this episode, we dive into the power of listening, the courage it takes to foster real dialogue, and what it truly means to make space for others. Let's dive in. Welcome to the TrailBLAZER Pod. You're the first rabbi on the podcast, so this is super exciting for me. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you and learn all about you. And I often start my podcast with trying to understand where my guests come from. Who were they as a little girl and create that context. So can you share, I know you grew up in New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what was your childhood like? And particularly, how did Judaism play a role in your childhood?
Yeah, so I'll start actually with an anecdote that I think pretty much explains the rest of my life,
Okay.
which is it must have been in kindergarten or first grade, whenever it is you learn how to write letters.
Mm-hmm.
And our teacher must have given us a prompt that said, when I get to be a mommy, I will, or when I get to be a daddy, I will. You probably would never do this with a child now. The answer that I wrote and the picture that I drew, it said, when I get to be a mommy, I will get a job. And there's a picture of me walking away from a kitchen table that has a book on it that says cookbook. And so this really, I mean, this is like my 5 or 6 year old self sort of
Wow.
channeling really my feminism, my strong belief in women's leadership, my strong desire, which thank God has been realized, of being a parent,
Yeah.
and living, I think, in that intersection of professional leadership and a life that is rooted in home as well.
Yeah. I find that so fascinating because my bachelor's degree was in sociology. So I'm always interested in the intersection between different things. It's exactly what you're talking about. So that speaks to me on a different level. And I know later on, you initially planned to attend law school, right?
Yes, I did. And it came actually out of that same desire to enact leadership in the
Mm.
world, and specifically women's and feminist leadership. And so, what I imagined for myself, as one does when they are young, a very neat package that I would
Yeah.
graduate from Barnard College, apply to, and attend law school and work in some kind of nonprofit that would be advocating for the
Mm.
kinds of issues and values that were always and continue to be important to me. And, life happens.
Yeah, it
That's
does.
like the blessing of it all, right? Good and
Yes.
bad things happen, and you have to respond to them, / you get to respond to them.
Oh, I love that.
And so for me, um, you know, I, at the same time that I was planning this very neat, tidy, planful life for myself, I was re engaging and falling in love with Judaism. And that is the path ultimately, of course, that I have walked on. But it was almost a love affair, right? Like it sort of was like, oh, now I have this and everything is
Yeah.
different.
Wow. So powerful. You said something that really resonates with me because I'm a big planner. And the saying, man plans, God laughs.
I
That's
say,
been my whole life. Yeah, exactly. It's been my whole life. I definitely, because I was the first to go to college in my family and really anyone I knew, I very much thought I need to have a plan. I need to stick by it. I can't change my mind because I need to defend my decisions, all that stuff. And I was also a very passionate 18-year-old girl. And then as life goes on, of course, you're thrown these curveballs, and my life does not look anything like I thought it would, but it's so much better for it. And I think when you step back, you can see, okay, so I didn't go in initially, I wanted to do criminology. I didn't go into that field, but everything I learned at that time I use somehow and in some way in my life now, and it brought me to where I am. But I think like when you're 18, I say this a lot on the podcast. I wish somebody like you would have told me, Faye, it's okay to change your mind, or it's okay for something to not work out, because we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, I think.
Yeah, I sit with the question of would I believe someone who told me that at age 18?
Oh,
Because part of the blessing of human development
right.
and maturation, and why, as I always tell people, every decade is better than the one before it,
Yeah. Yeah.
is that you just know more.
Right.
Right. And so, I mean, I have children and I find myself trying to impart wisdom to them and say things exactly as you just said, which is you don't need to make a decision. It's probably going to be fine. And if it's not, you'll
Yeah.
switch gears. And I sort of see them looking at me like,
Right.
really? Mom, you don't really get it.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so maybe the wisdom is like the blessing, please God that we live long lives and that we have the opportunity to see ourselves encounter forks in the road,
Yeah.
encounter um, challenges, encounter surprises, and see our own ability, capacity to move through uh,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah, I really like that perspective actually. So you made a pretty significant pivot, speaking of pivots, from law to rabbinical school, and I'm hoping that you can share like what happened there, what motivated this shift. Sometimes it's like this one very clear thing and sometimes it's a bunch of different things put together. So I'm curious about your story.
Yeah, there's the sort of backdrop story, which is that in my early 20s, when I had graduated from college, I was really on a spiritual search. And it's hard for me to even put myself into the brain space of what that was, but it had something to do with the following, which is that when I was in college, I had a wonderful group of friends, many of whom are still very dear to me. And we were all involved in lots of activism and kind of social change work. And as we graduated, everyone went off to work either at a consulting firm or an investment bank, or
Mhm.
wanted to go to law school to work for a firm. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. Let me be clear. And I felt like, wow, is this next phase of life just about money?
Oh,
Or is there something else that makes a life a meaningful life? And that was the question that led me to re engage with Jewish practice and Jewish
wow.
life, which I had been, far away from during high school and college, and led me to make the following plan, which was that I would apply to law school, I would get my acceptance, and then I would go to Israel for the year and just learn and experience Israel, and then come back and
Yeah.
resume my very carefully laid out plan. And yeah, so life happens. And I had the opportunity to be connected to a group of rabbinical students who were in Jerusalem for the year. This was 1995 to 96, a very, very dramatic year in Israel for a
Yeah.
lot of reasons. And I met these students and I felt like they were the answer to that existential question I had been asking earlier, which is there a life that is not about money? Right.
Mm.
And I think that one of the most powerful things that Judaism, and I think particularly observant Judaism, can give us is a countercultural narrative that says actually what's meaningful is the time we spend in community and with friends. Actually, the holiest day of the week is a week in which we do not spend money or engage in technology or commerce or whatever. And that sets out a very different paradigm of meaning than I'm just going to make as much money as I can so that I can do the following kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I find it so fascinating and admirable that at such a young age you were like digging deep into these existential questions. Were you always like that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I was,
Okay.
and it didn't, I think, get me like a really great social life.
Yeah.
So,
I relate also to that. Like, it didn't affect me socially, but I always felt very different than my peers because I would just sit there and watch them and be like, how are they going about life, not wondering about these things? So I felt kind of weird internally. And I
yeah.
always, thank God my dad was the best. And I'd always message him, like, when I was in college, these questions, and he'd answer and give me books. And like Viktor Frankl's book, The
Mhm.
Purpose, The Meaning of Life. So I really relate to that, and I think I've always been like that as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, again, I think it's another countercultural aspect of Jewish living that has so much to offer us,
Yeah.
right? Which is about what it means to have an inner life,
Yeah.
to have a sense of faith, to have a sense of connection to the divine, so that we are inhabiting the world in a way that is multidimensional.
Yeah.
There's an inner peace, there's an aspirational piece, there's a spiritual piece. And all of those pieces are encouraging us and carrying us and comforting us, in whatever we face.
Yeah. So for those of us, and this I'm including myself, that don't know the process of becoming a rabbi, what does that look like?
For me, I had almost no Jewish background at all, so I had
Hmm.
to learn Hebrew and learn lots
Wow.
of really fundamental basics of, Jewish
Wow.
Judaism.
Yeah.
And I was always a very eager student, and I think that the opportunity to immerse myself in something new to me felt, um, both like a great opportunity, but I also want to say that when you're used to being like the smartest one in the room, and all of a sudden you're like learning the alphabet,
Yeah.
it's a little bit
Yeah.
it's a little bit humbling.
Yeah.
Um, and I still feel, in a way, always far behind, uh,
Really.
even as I, have been in the rabbinate for, gosh, like 23 years.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
and so rabbinical school was really interesting for me. I went to the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is the conservative Jewish seminary. And when I got there, the decision to ordain women as rabbis was still very fresh.
Hmm.
I think the first woman had been ordained just 12 years before
Okay.
I started. And having come from Barnard College and having grown up as a passionate
Yeah.
feminist, I think I was unprepared for the
Wow.
cultural milieu in which I found myself,
Yeah.
which was a milieu in which it was not exactly clear that all of our teachers and all of our classmates actually supported the idea of women being rabbis. And it was a challenging period of
Yeah.
time. I felt that the school should have been further along in its ability not just to tolerate women, but to accept and celebrate what it means to be ordaining men and women as rabbis. And the school is very much there now, right? But wasn't there then, and
Wow.
created, I think, some challenges for me and other female students. I always have used this anecdote, but the entire 5 year rabbinical school experience, we only met one female pulpit rabbi as like one of the guest speakers.
Mm.
And she came in to talk about how hard it is to be single when you're a pulpit rabbi.
Oh, wow.
Right. And
Wow.
so there was like just a sense that like the world had become so much more sophisticated on what women's leadership is and was.
Hmm.
This was not the 1890s, it was
Right.
the 1990s. And the school wasn't there yet. And it was notable. I mean,
Wow.
again, I will say that they're very much there now.
Yeah.
And my very dear friend and Chavruta, with whom I shared so much of these frustrations, and we would just sort of be banging our heads against the wall, like, oh my God, it's so crazy to be a woman here. And it's so, uh, so frustrating. She's now the dean of the rabbinical school.
Wow.
And
Okay,
so,
full circle.
exactly. And so I
Yeah.
sort of feel like the other lesson is use your voice,
Yeah.
right? Like she's there because the decades of women and our allies were pushing the system to move forward.
Yeah. Wow.
Um,
And it's
and
very hard to see in the moment that you're actually making a change.
oh my goodness,
Yeah.
there's sort of a dialectic there. There's first the necessity of using our voices and speaking out and exercising our capacity to demand and plan for change. And on the other side is the faith that says
Mm-hmm.
change will happen.
Yeah.
Trust.
Yeah. Both are hard.
Mhm.
Did it ever make you doubt, is this the path for me? Or did it make you more confident in your choice?
It made me more stubborn.
Okay. That's a better word. I love it. I think it can do both. It can do either.
I just thought, oh, well,
Yeah.
you're telling me I can't be a rabbi?
I'm gonna
I'm going to be a 10x rabbi, right?
I love it. I love it. That's how you get things done in life.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, so when I was introduced to you, it was through an article that you wrote, which was about the state of the world right now and what that's doing for Jewish progressive women after October 7th. And I just want to preface, like, I don't get political on this podcast, but I don't think this is political. I truly believe in like the deep power of dialogue and understanding different perspectives. And, I have Hasidic women on here. I have women who have never been observant in their life. And I think that's the beauty of this podcast. And I will forever stick to that. I don't plan on changing that.
Amen.
Thank you. But I read something interesting that you were part of the Better Arguments Ambassador program, and I've never heard of it. So I'm just curious, like, what is that? And also, I want to hear from you. Why is dialogue important to you?
Yeah. So the Better Arguments Project is a reasonably new initiative of the Aspen Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe I was part of the first class of ambassadors that
Oh,
were
wow.
trained in this methodology. This was in 2021. And
Oh,
basically, what the folks there observed is that American society experiences itself as deeply polarized.
yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence
Mm-hmm.
to support that. And there are also really important things that the majority of people in our country and probably human beings have in common.
Right.
And so the forces of media, of social media, of divisive leadership focus on the first of those things,
Mm-hmm.
which is how alienated we all are
Yeah.
from each other. And the Better Arguments Project asks the question of what would it take to sit with the very real disagreements that people have with each other and to preserve the humanity of relationships and to understand the surprising and beautiful truth
Yeah.
that we often have things in common that we might not
Yeah.
see. And so the Better Arguments Project has this wonderful methodology about dialogue, and it begins with the following phrase, which I probably say to myself like 27 times a day. And that phrase is take winning off the table.
Ah, powerful.
It is.
Yeah.
It's powerful with your friends, your
Yeah.
colleagues, people who voted differently from you in the
Yeah.
election, people with different religious backgrounds.
Yeah.
Because we instinctively, in conversations with people, hear something and we're like, oh, well, I need to explain to them
Mm-hmm.
this or that. And first of all, we know enough about brain science to know that people's minds are not changed in that
Right.
I say,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
If you think about when is the last time
Yeah.
you had your mind changed about
Yeah.
some fundamental truth that you believed, it's not because somebody sat there and said, listen, Faye, let me tell you why you're wrong. And did you read this article in the Wall Street Journal? Because they're going to tell you how wrong you are.
Yep.
Like you kind of shut down to that
Yeah.
as people do. And so if we enter into conversation and the goal is not to win the argument or to convince the person with whom we are speaking that we are right and they are wrong, then we do something else, which is that first of all, we listen,
Mm-hmm.
sort of like the cortisol in our body kind of calms down and we just listen.
Yeah.
And the second thing we do without realizing it is that we prioritize the relationship with the person with whom we are speaking. And we give them the gift of listening to them. We give them the gift of being able to be full in their humanity. And we still don't have to agree with them.
Yeah.
But something happens in a dialogue like that that actually sows the seeds for all of us to soften our hard-won positions.
Yeah.
Right. I was speaking to somebody over last summer who had a very, very, very different take on what was then the upcoming election than I do, and that I did and that I continue to. And that person was explaining to me why one of the candidates was clearly the better candidate for
Mm-hmm.
the Jewish people and for the state of Israel. And, this is a person whom I respect, whom I see as a generous person in the world, a wonderful parent, a wonderful community member, a great friend, like the person who always shows up with,
Yeah.
all this stuff. And I just thought, right, I am just going to listen. And I'm going to know that chances are at the end of this conversation, I'm going to feel exactly the way I
Yeah.
did before. But I'm not going to go into this thinking that my job is to win or to
Right.
lose. It is just to listen.
Yeah. It almost seems so obvious, but I think it's one of the hardest things to do because I think naturally when somebody you care about thinks so differently, it's almost like, how could you? And it overshadows everything else you think about that person, right? It's like
It feels
this,
like a
it
betrayal.
feels like a betrayal. And I'm very grateful and I'm not perfect at all. I often find myself judging, but I try to catch myself. But because I studied global security studies, intelligence, counterterrorism, you're trained to think very objectively because your analysis cannot be political or anything like that. So I'm very, very thankful. This goes back to me mentioning like everything I learned somehow applies to my life today, but I'm very human and I often catch myself feeling betrayed by people and I have to go back to like ground zero and be like this is not who they are. This is one part of their thinking process. But it's so hard.
It's so hard.
So
I
hard.
mean, it's so hard. And if we take seriously the teaching that people are created in God's image,
Right.
right? Then the next question we have to ask is what are the conditions by
Mm.
which we can see that in a conversation,
Right.
right? And it's not the condition by which I say, you are wrong. You are,
Yes.
whatever.
Yeah.
You are morally bad. The condition is there is some spark in here that
Right.
is a reflection of the divine. And I can either try to seek that out or I can be convinced that I should shut it down.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
the work of being a religious person, I think, is to say, how do I find that spark?
Oh, I love that. I love how it all connects back to Judaism. It's amazing. So, speaking of, I want to talk a little bit about the article you wrote. And it's basically very short. Since October 7th, you discuss how political values shifted for progressive women, people. I would say specifically women is your argument here because of women's right and choice and all of that. But they've been experiencing this because after October 7th, we started to realize, the stake of the Jewish people in Israel. So, can you share with me what are the internal and external tensions that you've seen emerge since then?
Yeah. I keep using the phrase that liberal Jewish women feel politically homeless.
Oh, yeah.
And that homelessness is born out of a set of beliefs that we ascribe actually to our Jewish values.
Mm,
And those values are about being active members of the society in which we live. Those values are about advocating for people who are vulnerable. Those values include helping and serving and donating to causes that we think bring about a world that is more just and more reflective of what it is that God wants from us. And so it's no surprise that the majority of Jewish people, I think in the last election, it was something like 78% of Jewish women voted for a Democratic candidate, right? Because that is where many people ascribe um, these kinds of values to be situated.
yeah.
And I think that the wake up call of October 7th, not October 7th really, but October 8th,
Right.
is
Yes.
that some of the groups, some of the people, some of the causes with which we have been so deeply aligned and whose fate we have felt as Jewish women is so strongly bound up in our fate had a very different
Yeah.
understanding of what it is that happened and the way a sovereign nation ought to respond to
Yeah.
the slaughter of its citizens and the theft of its people into being hostages, which
Yeah.
continues to this day. 59 hostages remain in Gaza today, 500 and I think 31 days later. And I think many Jewish women felt that at best there was a silence on the part of the people whom we assumed were our allies. And at worst, there was a condemnation of the experience of Jewish vulnerability
Yeah.
and the need out of that vulnerability to defend ourselves.
Yeah.
And what that has become over these last 18 or 19 months is an understanding that much of the progressive world who populate these organizations and institutions that advocate for the causes that most Jewish women believe in have a reflexive anti Zionism
Yeah.
that really reads the wrong way, I think, to most of the Jewish community in this moment for two reasons. The first is that the majority of Jewish people are Zionists.
Yeah.
And so when we condemn Zionism, we are condemning what the majority of Jewish people believe. And I think from a just a purely tactical standpoint, organizations that work on domestic issues like reproductive rights or LGBTQ rights in our country, um, spending so much time commenting and advocating for a conflict that's taking place around the world
Yeah.
is just a real misalignment of resources.
Yeah.
And it does make me wonder how effective are those organizations and leaders if this is how they're spending their time. It's
Wow.
as though I, as the CEO of the JCC of Manhattan, felt that if something happened in China, I would need to,
Right.
you know, have a statement and have my whole staff aligned on this and be speaking out against it. And I
Right.
think that if that were the case, what I would hope is that my board would say to me, Joanna, like, let's stay in our lane.
Right.
Let's do the good work that, society needs us to do. And let's let the people who are experts on that issue uh, uh, take that issue on.
Yeah.
And so out of that confluence of events became an experience and exists an experience for Jewish women of feeling like, well, who are our allies? Like, I'm a passionate supporter of reproductive rights. Um, am I safe in those
Right.
environments as a Jewish woman who is a Zionist?
Right.
Right? Am I wanted in that environment? And I think that that has led us to, in some ways, pull back from some of this work. But what I tried to argue in that article is that the people who are served by these organizations and by the advocacy for equity and reproductive rights and fairness in housing are not the same as the people who are running these organizations. And that we cannot forget that at the core of all of this work are vulnerable people who
Right.
need us to continue to stay in these fights
Yeah.
because that's our religious obligation, actually, but it's also their humanity and dignity that is at stake.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is like have us collectively bracket out the poor behavior of lots of leaders sort of post October 7th and foreground the needs of people who are truly vulnerable. And particularly, I think, in this moment when there is so much
Yeah.
going on in our country.
Yeah. How do you see this, if it can, resolving?
I often think that anti Semitism is like the canary in the mine, right? And so if you've got that, you're in trouble, right? Societies that are deeply, passionately anti Semitic are not the societies where it ends well,
Right.
right? And we don't need to even like,
Right.
you know, it's just like in our blood, in our genes as Jews.
Yeah.
And so if I think like, okay, what is the canary in the mine in this moment? It's that the progressive movements, which absolutely need to be functioning at high velocity in this time, right? Like when people's rights are being taken away, when reproductive freedom is under attack, they just need to be doing so much better
Mm-hmm.
and being so much more strategic and effective. And the fact that so many of these organizations descended into this kind of like dysfunction is not a good sign. And so, what I would say, the good news there is that the solution set is actually that organizations should focus on their work. They should do it in as broad coalition as possible, even when it means they have to compromise on some, you know, things that they're very passionate about. But that's what leadership is.
Right.
It's basically saying, like, here is a vision of the future. Here's why all of us can be a part of it. And here's how you can participate.
Yeah.
So I think
Wow.
that's the good news is that's what needs to happen, I think, in the liberal and progressive worlds.
Yeah. So you mentioned leadership. So you are the CEO of the JCC of Manhattan. You mentioned that earlier, and you stepped into this role during COVID. So I first want to start by asking you, like, what's the JCC's core mission, and then after, how has it evolved under your leadership?
Yeah. The JCC's core mission is to be a fruitful and generous and welcoming place for Jewish community in all of its iterations.
Yeah.
And to be open to the community in which we live, which is the Upper West Side of Manhattan,
Yeah.
a diverse community made up of people of all different backgrounds. And that's a great mission to have, no
Yeah.
matter what is going on in the outside world. And so I would say that starting, during COVID was sort of an interesting challenge because I had been running a community center for 9 years before that on the Lower East Side. And I felt like, oh, okay, I know how to run a community.
Yeah.
This is bigger. And now I'm the CEO. So that's different. But
Right.
like, I kind of know how to do this, except if nobody wants to leave their house, I do not know how to do this, right?
The one thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, um, So I really thought to myself, well, if no one ever leaves their house, I'm probably not going to be very good at this job. And the good news is that people did leave their houses and that the JCC was here and waiting for them with open arms and a lot of love and generosity.
Yeah.
And this is a place I've never worked anywhere like this before, where there is such a mutual love between the community and the institution. Like
Yeah.
people always say, "Oh, I love the JCC." And the first thing that comes to mind is the JCC loves you back.
Oh, that's so special.
Um, and so that is like the precious DNA that I inherited in taking on this role, that there was just a kind of, this is a real yes culture. People come to us with an idea and we really like try to say yes, like move mountains, figure out
Yeah.
how to serve people who have never been served before, figure out, how the tent that is this place can have ever expanding stakes, right? Um, and I think that I have tried only, first and foremost, not to mess that up, um, but also to keep thinking about what does an inclusive Jewish community look like in a world that keeps giving us these
Yeah.
huge curveballs. I mean, COVID, October 7th, I think now our country feeling stressful for many people. These are big global curveballs
Yeah.
that didn't originate at the JCC, but for which the JCC has an important role to play in how we hold the community amidst a lot of turbulence.
Yeah. I love how, because really everything you're saying about the JCC is encompassing our conversation about inclusivity and dialogue. And I think it's so beautiful. It really is like reflecting our conversation with COVID and October 7th and October 8th and all the days after. I can't imagine the skills that it takes to be a CEO or a leader for the JCC. I always like to ask like the incredible women I interview, what leadership skills did you use? And I think this is helpful because for women or young girls who are going to go into a leadership position or wish they could and they don't know how, I would love to pick your brain on that because I think you're so inspirational and I think you're the perfect person to ask. So any advice, any insights would be amazing.
I'll just tell you a quick story about my son, which is that when he was in, I think, first or second grade, his class was learning about adjectives. And the assignment was that he had to pick somebody in his life and think of two adjectives about them. And he picked me, and the adjectives that he picked were kind and bossy.
Oh, that's the cutest thing I've ever heard. Oh my God.
So true. I mean, I thought, wow, you really know me.
You nailed it. I love that. Wow.
So I would say kind and bossy,
Yeah.
right? And I don't mean bossy in a way that is about dominating people.
Right.
I mean bossy in a way of holding up a vision and a standard and a set of practices, and having that be your North Star that everybody has to acclimate themselves to. And then I think that kindness and seeing the humanity of the people around you, even when, especially when they disagree with you, is kind of the secret
Yeah.
sauce.
Yeah.
Because if people feel honored and recognized and seen, they'll really stretch themselves. And if they don't feel honored and respected and seen, they're going to be like, you're asking me to move a pen 2 inches. I am never going to do that.
Right.
Right. And so I think those are two core values of my leadership. And I would say also what I hope I've been able to do is actively seek out advice when I don't know the answer to some issue
Yeah.
that's coming up. I'm blessed to have an incredible board of lay leaders with whom I can really say things like, I don't know how to do
Right.
this. Who should I be asking?
Yeah.
Or what am I missing here? Or did I mess this up? And I think that the openness to saying what we don't know, saying where we might be stuck, leads people to be their most generous.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm like defensive and whatever, which by the way, I can be, it's
We
hard
all
for
can.
people to meet you in a place of generosity,
Right.
right? Like the best thing to say when something is not going well is like, I messed up,
Right.
right? And then everyone sort of like goes like, okay, well, how do we fix
Right.
this?
They rally around you.
Exactly. Like it's like I don't know who said this, but the cover up is worse than the crime, whatever. If you're like, oh,
Right. Yes.
this one's fault, that one's fault. Like it's
Exactly.
hard for people to rally around. And so I have tried to live up to those values. And what I would also say is that I don't live up to them every minute and every day. And that I am also a human being.
Yes.
Things annoy me. And I'm just doing my best.
Yeah. I think for me, that's the biggest takeaway is that everyone who seems to have it all together is human at the end of the day. And to me, that's the most meaningful because I think I'm just going to speak for myself. I often compare myself to, or I want to be a better version of myself, right? So that's often comes out as comparison, as this is somebody I admire. I would love to have what she has. Like, I would love to have this skill. And then that's a lot of pressure because it's not really possible to have that 24/7. So when somebody like you shares, this is my goal and this is how I often try to be, but sometimes it doesn't work. That's powerful to me. So thank you for sharing that part. And I think the part before goes back to what you were saying earlier. It's about taking winning off the table, right? And I think that's also really, really amazing. So I end off the podcast by asking all my guests the same question, which is, what does being a trailblazer mean to you?
Being a trailblazer means opening up possibilities for other people through my leadership.
Thank you so much.